Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, journalists, people who put stuff out so that we can all kind of find out what they're thinking about when they write about our home borough of the Bronx. And in our second segment, you're going to learn something. You're going to really appreciate this theater production that's going on at Hostos Community College. And it's about the history of our borough. And as I said, you're going to really enjoy it. But right now, let's say good evening to Alex Zimmerman, who is our buddy. He's a reporter for Chalkbeat New York, covering New York City public schools. Nice to see you again, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Alex, I was expressing to you, it's just so important. Obviously, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of New York City kids are in our schools. And if we didn't have people like you doing what you do, we wouldn't know anything about it. So thank you very much. So we had a snow day, which was interesting because it was a snow day, but, we learned something with virtual technology, much like we're using now. But then we find out after the fact that there were technical issues on this snow day. So what happened? I thought we were going to have a snow day without it being a snow day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, snow days are a little bit of a creature of the past because, going forward, the city just calls for remote learning anytime there's inclement weather, and they would have otherwise closed school buildings. But this time around, the city actually informed families and schools almost a full day in advance. So this was Monday, that they were planning to go to remote on Tuesday as a snowstorm approached. But when sort of thousands of parents and students and educators tried logging in on Tuesday morning, many of them were confronted by error messages. This is partly because the city has moved to this sort of more centralized process for logging into like Google Classrooms and email accounts and those sorts of things. In the past, that had really been managed by individual schools during different parts of the pandemic. But now that it's managed centrally, if something sort of breaks with that process,
Oh, then the whole castle comes down.
right, then it affects every school. And so what the city says happened on Tuesday morning was that IBM, which is the company that's responsible for managing some of the login process, apparently wasn't ready for everyone to try logging in at once, and just sort of didn't have the capacity to manage that.
So it crashed the system.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that seems to be
Wow.
basically what happened. That there just wasn't enough capacity. At least that's what top education department officials have been saying.
Wow. During the pandemic, we remember we were all trying to, I don't say we were, but the schools were all trying to get the kids wired up. And one of the biggest issues, certainly in the Bronx, maybe more than in other boroughs, was the digital divide. A lot of the kids didn't have laptops, didn't have an iPad. So you're saying, here's your school, but you can't attend. I was wondering if, in fact, this was part of the issue. In this case, we didn't really guarantee that all 30 kids in every classroom were going to have the same technology that we're using right now. So, I don't know how to, the system is not ready yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of played out in a very school by school way, right? So some schools were able to send their students home with, laptops or iPads or, whatever tech they've had on hand to make sure that students had access. I think, among a lot of the schools I talked to, they were able to send students home with technology, but the question then becomes like, do students have Wi-Fi access at home? Like, how strong is that internet connection? Can it support kind of live instruction? Which is sort of interesting. That's kind of what the education department was promising would happen, is students would kind of go to their classes and have live instruction throughout the day. And what some of my reporting showed was that that did happen in some places, but it seemed like one of the more common, especially in high schools, the more common thing that was happening, including some students I talked to actually in the Bronx, was that schools would actually kind of have like office hours, and students would have kind of work that they could do independently and could sort of check in with their teachers to ask questions throughout the day if they had them.
Boy, oh boy. You
Um,
really, listen, I was a New York City school child. If they said, do me a favor, do the work at home and then check in, good luck. And I'm not criticizing the kids. Kids are kids. you're really kind of optimistic if that's your point of view, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 other things I just wanted to note too, which is, 1, the city's remote learning platforms did sort of come to life that morning. So they were able to kind of like add the capacity they needed on the fly. And, students did tell us that they were able to log in later that morning.
Okay.
Um, so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it that I think is important to emphasize is that the big reason that they are doing remote learning instead of calling snow days is because they've added holidays to the school calendar.
I
So
I I
they
I
really,
was gonna ask you about that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so they really have very little wiggle room.
'Cause
By
they need
law,
180 days of school, and
yeah,
if you add
exactly.
holidays, you have no choice.
Right. And so the city has added a handful of holidays in recent years. They've added Juneteenth, they've added Diwali, they've added the Lunar New Year. So they're a
Right.
growing number of holidays, and that just leaves them with no wiggle room. So if they call a snow day, they have to legally make that day up somewhere else, and there aren't very many options to do that.
And I know that people, frankly, my age or others who were like, it snowed. It didn't kind of really snow a lot. I was thinking, because some people were asking me about it, I was thinking that closing the schools was as much, if not more, because you couldn't get staff in and teachers who live outside the city, because that's really where the snow was. It really didn't fall as heavily and as hard, and by noon it was all gone on that day. And so that was really the reason why they closed the schools. Not as much because the kids couldn't get to school, but because you certainly can't have full schools with understaffed. So I thought that was
Yeah.
interesting, and your point is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I also think, like, in this case, they really called the decision to go remote before they had a super clear sense of how the snowstorm was gonna play out. And, there's a trade-off there, right? Like, if you're gonna do a remote snow day, schools need to know in advance. They need to be able to send kids home with with computers. Like, that's very hard to do, like, with just a couple hours notice. So I think they wanted to give people a little bit more of a heads up. But the flip side of that is then you're kind of getting a little bit ahead of the weather forecast. And so then if it doesn't snow very much, it looks a little silly to have had a snow day with
Right.
almost no snow on the ground.
Right. It's a very difficult thing. And then, of course, we're kind of ignoring the obvious. If IBM is not going to be running a system that really can support the million kids in New York City schools, and how many schools there are in the city, then you really have a problem. So hopefully the city will learn its lesson, and we'll kind of go from there. I don't want climate change to hit that hard that we never get snow anymore. But, anyway, the other thing I want to talk to you about, which was just a fascinating concept and you wrote about it, that New York City sued TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram over the youth mental health crisis, contending that social media platforms um, are designed to be addictive, harming young people's mental health, and serving as venues for bullying and all the other problems that it creates. It. I'm not saying that the mayor is wrong, because we know it does harm kids, but from a legal point of view, I don't know. What's your analysis? Is this something that really is? Because that would be a huge, huge lawsuit and a huge legal matter if that really went through.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. And New York City is not the first municipality to do this. There are actually a couple hundred other school districts and other kind of local governments that have filed similar lawsuits, basically trying to link social media companies to declining youth mental health and concerns about like how young people are feeling. And yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like a really open question, like how successful a legal strategy this is. I mean, some of the experts I've seen sort of offering their own analysis of the situation is that like these lawsuits are also just partly about raising awareness. So sort of trying to
Oh,
mount
that now
kind of
that's
like,
fascinating. Very good point. It's raising awareness for parents to say, you know what, this is, so maybe they're not looking for money or something else. They may be saying, look, let's just let everybody know that social media is hurting our kids.
yeah, or even sort of create some pressure on, other arms of the government, so creating some pressure on the state legislature or the US Congress to take some regulatory action, or even sort of getting some of the companies to take action sort of on their own, regardless of whether it's compelled by a judge or something like that. So I
Right,
think there
right.
is sort of an yeah, I think
Yeah,
there's an effort to
other
sort of
safety tools like warnings for children or not making it available to people of a certain age. But obviously I'm a media person, and if you go there and you say this media, this social media is harming people, well, you've got a lot of media out there that may not be telling the truth, that may be distorting things. You have AI that's all over the place. I mean, if something like that would go through, you could extend that lawsuit to a lot. I don't want to start calling out networks that are like that, but we could and say, well, wait a minute, they're not telling the truth, and they may be really harming mental health and many other things. So I wonder about it. You know,
yeah, and I think
is there a status for this, or the mayor put it out and we'll see what happens?
yeah, I mean, they filed this lawsuit in California state court, along a couple different legal theories, one of which is like a public nuisance kind of theory,
Right,
which I think is actually sort of similar to what some school districts have done around like vaping. And I think that, the mayor is obviously trying to draw some parallels between those two kinds of like
right.
legal efforts.
And
I
just
think
curious, we're almost out of time. Did were any of the lawsuits in the other municipalities successful, or they're still all pending?
That's a great question. I mean, there are a lot of them, and I'm certainly not an expert in each individual
Mhm.
one. My sense is that they're still kind of winding their
It's
ways through
pending.
the courts and are kind of just going through discovery now.
We would need another half hour to have this dialogue. We got about a minute. Um, give a grade. Um, Education reporters love that. Give a grade for the new literacy effort by Chancellor Banks and how it's working. Do you like it? Is it working out? Still a work in progress? How do you see it?
I think it's still a work in progress. I mean, I think it's been kind of a bumpy rollout so far. One of the biggest challenges with something like this is training the thousands of teachers who are going to be
Absolutely.
implementing new
Yeah.
materials. And I think so far, teachers are really craving more of that than the city has offered. So yeah, I
And
mean, I think
again, we do got to go. It's all about resources. Do you have the resources to do the training and with a million kids and all the schools? How are you going to really, do a system wide thing? You saw what happened with just the mere technology. We couldn't figure it out. Listen, Alex Zimmerman of Chalkbeat, New York, we need you. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us. Guaranteed, we're going to check with you again.
great. It was great to be here. Thanks for having
Good.
me.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to take a short break, folks, and then you're going to hear about an absolutely wonderful production that's going on at Hostos Community College, and we'll be right back. Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I am absolutely thrilled about this segment. So let's just get right to it. Let's bring on an old friend, Americo Cassiano, who is a poet. Nice to see you, Americo. We'll
Yeah.
give you the whole 9 yards here. Community activist, member of the Young Lords Party in the late '60s, member of the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights. from 89 through 96, where he organized against police brutality in favor of social and environmental justice. I'm assuming those things are still important to you.
Yes, they are.
Needless
Yes,
to
they
say.
are.
And also joining us is Lillian Jimenez, who is a filmmaker, educator, producer, director, media literacy pioneer, arts administrator, organizational development consultant, et cetera, et cetera. Nice to have both of you with us. I am just thrilled about this. It's a show that's going to take place at Hostos Community College. TT Strikes Back, Evelina's Return. As I mentioned to both of you before this segment, it was an education for me just to study and get ready for this segment. Maybe, Americo, let's start with you. Who was Evelina, and why is it so important that we remember who she is, who she was, and do this play? The play is TT Strikes Back, Evelina's Return. And there we go. Americo, why is
Yeah,
this important?
Miss Antonetti was a parent activist in the late '60s, early '70s. One of the key pioneers for uh, decentralization of schools. She worked very hard in the South Bronx, in the, I believe it's right now referred to District 8. When she was living there, and also in the West Bronx, there's a wonderful picture of her. And she wanted to. She believed strongly in two things: parent being empowered and having the curriculums of the public school system relevant to our communities and relevant as much academically as well as culturally. She's a well-known activist. She helped with the committee against the Fort Apache movie, but she was very key in other things. She was very key in bringing federal programs to the catchment area that they serve. I got to know her through the federal summer lunch programs in 71, 72, and 73. I also, as an undergrad student and an activist with the Puerto Rican Student Union and YLP, helped her and the organization work with sort of like taking our youth out of the gang systems and giving them something positive to do. So we were very key in, and she used these phrases in changing the Ghetto Brothers to a community organization, so that
Mhm.
they worked with the youth, especially youth in danger, giving them different type of activities, and
Activities that get.
also, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say different activities so that they could get on the right path. I just
Right.
wanted to interject. To me, this sounds like a real American hero. And unfortunately, probably not enough people know about her. I was really not familiar with her work. I mean, I grew up in the 70s in the Bronx. Lillian, talk to me a little bit about why it was so important to you and to others to have this play come back to our home country, her home country in the Bronx on 149th Street off the Grand Concourse.
Well, Evelina was very acutely aware of representation, and that's why she fought against that film, Fort Apache, the Bronx, because it was full of stereotypes. So, our dear friend Sandra Nia Rodriguez had written a play about Evelina. She had worked with Evelina. She wrote a play about Evelina, and it was produced a long time ago. Very original, very interactive. And there was a series of events last year, Evelina 100. And Sandra came to New York from Puerto Rico, and she showed an excerpt. She performed an excerpt at Hostos. And those of us in the audience were just absolutely, people who had known Evelina, who had met her, were just absolutely taken. This performer transformed into Evelina. And by the end of the short excerpt, we were just standing up and yelling and thought, oh my God, young
That
people.
is so beautiful. I
It was
have to say that
wonderful.
is just so beautiful.
It was a great experience. And so we thought, oh my gosh, just like you did not know about Evelina,
Hmm.
so many of the young people in the South Bronx who need inspirational leaders, they don't know about her. And so we thought, you know what, we should put this play on. We should do it at Hostos in the South Bronx. She was an advocate for to ensure that Hostos was there.
Right.
That's
CUNY
another reason why it's important that it's taking place there. Absolutely.
Exactly. So she was an incredible advocate for education. And we just thought these young people need to know about this legacy of someone who came from Puerto Rico, came to New York, pulled herself up, and then absolutely was committed to the community in every way possible. It wasn't just about education. She developed a nutrition program. She started a daycare center. She had one of the first contracts for Head Start, again, in this educational vein. She was just such an incredible figure. And she was really protective and supportive of all of those young radicals like Americo Casiano. And so, we looked up to her. We thought she was just this extraordinary person. One little anecdote I want to say is that whenever she showed up at any event, whether it was a demonstration or she came with food. I mean, she had this cafecito a las 3 o'clock coffee time, which actually the Center for Puerto Rican Studies has now replicated. But she would always show up with food, and that was so much a part of the Puerto Rican culture.
So, I said it almost somewhat tongue in cheek when I talked about Americo's credits against police brutality in favor of social and environmental justice. And then I said tongue in cheek, well, not like we don't fight for these things today. The same issues that she fought for are exactly what is front and center in the borough of the Bronx and the Puerto Rican community and all our communities today, which is why this is so important, number one, to know who she was, but realize that it still goes on. So Lillian, will give you both a chance to talk about this. Lillian, just talk about what people will see, because this is not exactly a biopic as you were so used to seeing in on streaming right now. There's a biopic of everybody. This is not a documentary of her, but it's a look at her return.
It's a look at
quotation marks.
All of the issues that she was involved in. It really gives you a sense of her dynamic personality. And, it's featuring Rockefeller, who's one of the original B-girls from the South Bronx during the whole hip hop phase. And so, Evelina, it's so original. Evelina has died, and she has been working on behalf of God in, dealing with all these issues. And then a junta is superimposed on her, very much similar to the junta in Puerto Rico now. And so then they start to cut back on her resources. And she has this engagement with God where she's arguing with God, who is a woman. So it's an all-woman cast. And Rockefeller, the stagehand, is just looking, and she doesn't have a clue what's going on. So there's an enormous amount of cultural aspects of Puerto Rican culture embedded
that just comes through there. Americo, I want to give you a chance to give your impressions of kind of this fantasy, but a very real fantasy that and why people and Bronx people, especially young people today, would relate to.
Well, she's a person who can fit today's times, yesterday's times, because she was on point on key issues that, like as you said, are still with us today. She still believed in good education, in parent empowerment, and student empowerment, and she was on point on as to what should be our line in those topics, and yet it hasn't gone away. We have some of our officials and leaders of today are promoting the same thing, and I mean, she was just a universal person who was on point. And I
This
think that's
dialogue,
important.
this dialogue goes on. I mean, frankly, in all my work on BronxNet, all the time we talk about what our kids doing after school. The segment before you on this program was about the kids in school and having access to technology and all those things. If she's alive today, this is exactly what she'd be fighting for today. I do want to mention, so people say, well, wait a minute, you're talking glowingly about this. So this is happening at the Hostos Center for Arts and Culture at the Repertory Theater, March 19th at 10 and noon, March 20th, 10 and noon, March 21st, 10 and noon. That's for the kids. That's for schools. We want school groups to come by. We want teachers to use it in their classrooms. And then I'm happy to say, because I'm really looking forward to it. An evening performance at 7 o'clock on the 21st
Yes.
for the general audience. Again, we'll go around the room here. Lillian, if you were going to tell, in particular, Puerto Rican people in the Bronx, and obviously there are many of them, of why they need to see it and why they need to learn about it, give me a couple of sentences for that, and then we're going to ask Americo the same question.
I think that, you know, Evelina was somebody who looked at assets in the community. She didn't look at challenges. She looked at assets. And I think that's part of what this play will communicate to people, is that there are enormous assets in our communities, and we just have to see them and work with them. We also have to work with each other in order to change the situation in our communities. And so for young people, there's a host of issues that they can really sink their teeth into, including with their parents. So this is not something where it's dividing the parents from the children and the youth. It's really about all together, people can really make a change. And she did that. She worked with all levels of people, very intergenerationally, and impacted so many people. So it's about, I think, utilizing those values in our community that many of us grew up with, which is about sharing, cooperation, and really dealing with the challenges head on. And that's what young people can do. They have energy, they have smarts.
Tremendous.
And,
yeah, thank you. I don't want to run out of time. Americo, we'll give you, 45 seconds to just talk about the
Yeah.
same kind of thing. What's your impression?
If you're here now today as a parent or as an adult or a youth trying to address an issue, the first thing you need to know, you're not alone, and it's always been a battle for those things. And one of the
And
leaders
and
was
it's been
Evelina.
done before. And
Yeah,
and
and by seeing Evelina, you will reinforce what you believe and how you feel we need to go forward on the
beautiful.
issues.
And if she were here today, she'd be doing the same thing. I mean, it would be the same exact fighting for the kids in schools, fighting for our image, fighting for Puerto Rican independence, and fighting for Puerto Rican identity, which is obviously vital. Before we run out of time, Americo, you had another event that you wanted to mention about. And so if you
Right.
would be so kind.
Yeah, we're honoring some of the past writers of the Puerto Rican African American community that have gone to the higher levels on the first Sunday of March. We're calling it a griot get together, and those of us who are still with us are going to pick a poet that has passed away and read one of their works, and then we'll come back with one of our works and read to again keep the memory going. And that's very important here in the show because many of those that we're going to honor lived in the Bronx. Algarin, Miguel Algarin, founder of New York Poets Cafe, was a Bronxite.
Great.
Luis Reyes Rivera was a
We got to
Bronxite.
run. So that's coming up. We put the poster up so people can see it. Americo Cassiano, it's great to see you again. I'm thrilled we had this dialogue. And Lillian Jimenez, nice to meet you. And identity for Puerto Ricans and all the people of the Bronx who come from all over the world is so vital. And you guys are going to be doing it at Hostos Community College at the Repertory Theater, March 19th, 20th. And 21st. Thank you so much for joining us on the Bronx Buzz.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Okay, that will do it. We thank Alex Zimmerman from Chalkbeat. We thank Americo and Lillian. And you know what I always say, if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, yeah, we'll be back next week. Good night.